Hey, this is Scott from phasingplayer.com. Look, you've seen the title of the video, you know what this is. Let's get right to my review of BIOS MESOFAUNA. So I'll say right at the top that a copy of this game was provided to me by the publisher, so take everything I have to say in this video with a grain of salt. If you've only got a moment and just really want to know what I broadly think of the game, I think it's alright. I think it's pretty solid at 2 players. Not really my cup of tea at 3 or 4 though, but the setting is great. At 2 players can be a pretty strong tactical area control game. The pace of the game though is a little off at 3 or 4, and is something I would not really take out at that player count. As far as it compared to Megafauna, I think it's better, but broadly is kind of similar, so I don't know if you need both in your collection. If that's all you really wanted to know, thanks for stopping by, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to know a little more detail, keep on watching. So for those that don't know, the BIOS series of games is a series of board games chronicling the history of life on Earth, starting with microorganisms in BIOS Genesis, advancing to larger animals in BIOS Megafauna, and finally humanity in BIOS Origins. The game has its roots in an old game called American Megafauna, from the same designer, but didn't really coalesce into a structured series until the last decade or so, with the aforementioned BIOS titles. These games not only share some of the themes and mostly the same settings, but also an aesthetic and some mechanical ideas. They can also be connected into a grand campaign game, though, in my experience, the connections from game to game are a little tenuous and thin, mostly just carrying over victory points from game to game and a couple of other little things. Some people, though, really like the idea, so the option's there. While I do occasionally enjoy a game of the first entry in the series, BIOS Genesis, Megafauna and Origins kind of came and went from my collection after only a handful of plays each. They didn't really click with me, so when BIOS Mesofauna, a game that also I should say I was briefly tied to as the chief playtester for some reason, when that game was announced, I wrote it off kind of quickly without much thought. It's based really heavily on Megafauna, but a little simpler and more accessible. And of course, the game focused on bugs instead of big animals. It can even be inserted into that grand campaign, replacing Megafauna in the trilogy. It's similar enough. So while I think that bugs are super rad and maybe the coolest living things on this planet, the rest of the proposition didn't seem like it would be for me, so it kind of came and went in my head. Well, flash forward 2 years or so, and here we are. I've played 7 or 8 games of BIOS Mesofauna, and now I'm recording the review. And honestly, like I said before, I kind of like it. For my tastes, honestly, it may be the best game in this ongoing BIOS series. But it certainly isn't perfect, and it has some of the same issues that I had with Megafauna, and introduces some new ones, and those might keep me from really recommending the game wholesale. So in BIOS Mesofauna, players take control of multiple bug species in a big, evolving world. On your turn, you get to take a single action on each of your species. Things that might let you populate into new areas, or mutate a new body part, or increase your sexual proficiency so you can populate more quickly than other bugs. Or maybe even speciate the bugs entirely into a new fork of your existing critters, carrying some of the inherent traits of the original, but transforming into a new type of creature that could dig, or swim, or even fly. Ultimately, though, there are 2 big picture goals in this game. Have the most bugs on the map, and have the most advanced bugs, as expressed through pheromones on cards. These are the 2 main things that are going to contribute to your end game score, and of course whoever has the most points at the end wins. So in a sense, that makes this sort of an area control game, but also a bit of a tableau builder. While I would love to say that these 2 facets of the game meld seamlessly together, the truth is that during my play they feel a little disparate. Yes, getting more cards and adding it to your species will increase how likely you are to win contests on the map, but with only a single action per species, I can't really focus on both the cards and the map presence, so I sort of have to pick and choose which one I become more powerful in more often than not. Sometimes, this choice is made for me with the cards that come out into the market. Other times, though, I'm going to have to see who my strongest rivals are and try to figure out how I can fight them on a common ground. In a 3-player game, though, especially, it means that if 2 players are battling in that common ground, the third may well have the luxury of just doing their own thing, and with the right card draws, maybe they can sneak away a bunch of points with no real competition. And that kind of leads me into one of my major problems with this game. the way you score points via the event system, which stems from those card draws. I guess at this point I should say that Mesofauna includes 3 modes of play: Cocoon, Caterpillar, and Butterfly. Those are ordered in terms of complexity, with Cocoon being the simplest and Butterfly being the most complex. Butterfly is the only one that features events, and is the mode that this review is based off of. There's also a solitaire mode built off of the Butterfly game mode. Most cards in Mesofauna look really similar. A bug part on one side, and more bug parts on the other side. But a good chunk of them also have these event icons on the bottom, which only come into play when they are revealed in the deck after a player buys cards from the market. When this happens, the last card remaining on the deck will trigger the events, which always begins with scoring. You're either going to score the most bugs on the map, or the most pheromones on living species. Following that will be events that could hurt overly advanced creatures, or split the map apart, or a variety of other things. These events create a little bit of unpredictability that you can plan for to some degree, but mostly you're going to have to ride the waves and hope that you can navigate this chaotic environment better than your opponents can. I think that this is a pretty fun system. It is chaos, but it's chaos that everyone has to manage, and the random events can create some exciting shifts in the game. Maybe everything was going really well for you, but then a mutagen event cut half of your cards, and now you once again have to compete at the other player's levels. Or maybe an event caused the map to rearrange in such a way that your new neighbors are able to outcompete your bugs in a way that your old neighbors' bugs couldn't, forcing you to adapt to your new environment. It is an elegant system, and it has some fun results, and generally, I think the system works alright. However, the very first event, the scoring event, that comes up in every event series, this is the thing I'm least enthused about encountering, and I think is maybe the biggest barrier to me really giving the game a hearty thumbs up. So like I said, when the scoring events come up, you're either going to gain points based on the most bugs on the map or the most pheromones on your species. One of those two is on every event card. The winner will gain a fossil from the supply, a supply of 10, and once those 10 are gone, the game is over. You also get 1 point for every fossil that you have. This is all fine, but consider that when you set up the game, each player deeper in the opening turn order places an additional bug on the map. So the first player places 1, the second player places 2, the third 3, etc. If on the very first turn someone mutates, which is taking a card, and a scoring event comes up for populated bugs on the map, whoever happened to be last in the turn order will immediately score it. And because there are only 10 events in the game, this can be a really big advantage, just based on the fact that you randomly set up last. I think every game I've played of this has had the person who sets up last either win the game or be very close to winning. It's honestly a serious advantage that really leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Now, population isn't the only way to score points, and fighting for pheromones can be a difficult and fun thing. Stretched out over time, it can be a real big battle, hunting and digging for the right card to build your bug out with, so that your mutations and your promotion actions have kind of a place to go. And it's fun to build your little bug portraits to see what sort of activities they might get up to. It really paints a cool picture of the bugs, and I think is a great addition to the game. These pheromones will also give you a discount to buying cards from the market. So they not only act as a way to score points, but they make it easier for you to continue to build up power on your bugs as the game goes on. However, the exact types of cards you need can be incredibly specific, and in a game of 3 or especially 4 players, it's really not uncommon to see the exact card you need pop up, and then by the time it gets back to you, the card is long gone. It can be frustrating, and it's gonna put you in a spot where you have to take an action that doesn't push you ahead in a way that you wanted it to. And I like games with sharp edges, don't get me wrong, but here the random chance and very weighted player setup combines to make me feel a little more frustrated with the game rather than invigorated to get ahead and play more. I keep thinking of ways to generate house rules that might smooth the whole scoring and event system over, and especially the starting player advantage, but I'm really not quite there yet. Additionally, any ties will share scores, which can really accelerate the end of the game tremendously. I've played games of this where a string of 3 consecutive scoring events that were all two-way ties drew out all of the remaining fossils and ended the game within 20 minutes of play, giving the player who happened to set up last and had done almost nothing else victory. This is not an every game occurrence, of course, but there are enough of these sorts of events that it isn't like a super rare thing either. Earlier, I had mentioned that the game offers 3 modes of play: Cocoon, Caterpillar, and Butterfly. Cocoon is the simplest, even being suggested as a game for kids in the manual, though I question if kids would have the focus to ignore 70% of the iconography on the cards and map, so I'm not sure how well that would work. Then there's Caterpillar, which adds quite a few systems, and this is where the game becomes a little more recognizable as a Phil Eklund strategy game, albeit a more straightforward one than you may expect. And then finally there's Butterfly, the whole enchilada full of rules exceptions and extra bits and bobs to mess around with. This final mode, Butterfly, is the one that I've played the most of, and is the one that I will continue to play, even with my gripes surrounding the event system. This is because Cocoon is too simple and not something I find interesting, but I understand it's not really for me, so that's fine. Caterpillar is a little more interesting, though because of the way the game does its scoring compared to Butterfly, the few games I played of it quickly turned into a race for a parasitic bug, which lets you sort of put more dudes on the map. And then it turned into a hunt for blue cubes, which strengthen parasites. It was initially a fun little exercise in competition, but quickly we realized most market cards were being ignored if they didn't have blue cubes. It ultimately felt one-dimensional and not something I'd really want to mess around with more, so instead I'll just say Butterfly is what I see as the canonical way to play this game if you're into heavier strategy games. So I have had a decent amount of negative stuff to say, but again, as I said at the top, I do like this game. The setting is great. I think that the way your bugs come together can be pretty evocative, both in terms of how they mechanically work, and also the way the little pictures end up being drawn on your cards once they're all promoted. It's clear a lot of thought and research went into this so that players can check out all their cool little bug bits as the creatures evolve, and you can sort of imagine how your little fellow works in the world, and it feels authentic. The game is pretty unique in its scope and implementation. It is a Phil Eklund game, so take that to mean whatever you think it should mean. I'm not going to get into that can of worms here, but for however you feel about the guy, he does make games that really no one else is making, and for that alone, I think the game has some value and is worth looking at if a more grounded, sciencey thing appeals to you. At the very least, appreciate this isn't another miniature-laden dark fantasy board game packed into 2 or 3 15-pound boxes. It also does have some exciting tactical play. Trying to one-up your neighbors and take over territory, or craft strategies to unseat their supremacy over the bug kingdom, is pretty fun, and it can require some pretty clever play, especially at 2 players. In fact, I quite enjoy this game at 2 players. The last player advantage I brought up earlier is much less significant at this player count. And because fewer cards get cycled in and out between your turns, there's a little more control over the larger game state. Enough that the tactical possibilities of the game really shine through much more brightly. It has the real potential to be a strong area control game, and one I may suggest with some regularity if I have one person who's down to play something kind of weird and funky. I also think the production of this game is pretty good. For one, it's got a really reasonable box size. The cardboard is also pretty thick, it's hefty. The colors are bright and, to my understanding, are friendly to most forms of color blindness. The setup of the game is quick, requires minimal table space. Something I will say about it, though, is that the wooden pieces, the wooden bug pieces, which are very cutely named creeples, are a little small in size, and the request to line them up on the side of the species card is a request that will never ever be fulfilled by my hands. I think it's clear that Ion designed a lot of their games during the COVID pandemic on a digital platform, which is well and good for something like gameplay, but not really ideal for understanding how pieces will actually function once they're held by human hands. I know other games that they've produced over the last couple of years have had similar complaints about component sizes, and while Mesofauna largely plays fine, these little wooden guys are pretty small. But, maybe I'm just overlooking another piece of thematic integration. Like, they're bugs, right? They're supposed to be pretty tiny. I don't know. So, ultimately, I'm a little torn with how I feel about Mesofauna. Where it ranks amongst the other BIOS titles is clear for my tastes. It's on the higher end. But remember, this is coming from someone who broadly doesn't like most of the existing BIOS games. I think that the simplification here compared to the bigger Megafauna is actually pretty appealing, as is the fast playtime and the small table space required. My 2-player games of this have played in like 45 to 60 minutes, which is pretty rad. But there are just too many incongruities with how the event system plays out. It feels a little at odds with the rest of the game once you get beyond 2 players. The urgency of the scoring events means I have to have laser focus on just 2 or 3 of the available actions, and I have to cross my fingers that even then things fall my way. I think house rules could probably improve and honestly maybe even entirely fix these issues, mostly in regards to changing how many points and how fossils get scored in regards to ties, and how many creeples people set up at the start of the game. But as it stands, the rules are frustrating to me when I have 3 or 4 players in the game, and that frustration is probably enough for me to just want to play something else. However, at 2 players, it's a pretty solid 1v1 area control game, and I think I'd recommend it in that regard. So there you go. Hopefully this gives you some idea of how I feel about BIOS Mesofauna. It's going to stay in my collection for now, and possibly a while, thanks to the tiny box size, and for how much I like it as a 2-player affair. But I don't know that I'm going to play this again at 3 or 4 people. So if that's your typical player count, kind of approach this one with some trepidation. That's it. That's the end of the video.